Our final guest of the day is a director, writer, and producer whose film experience has taken him and his audiences to every corner of the globe. You've seen his work in countless commercials, TV shows, documentaries, and feature films, including To Fly, The Shining, Blade Runner, Cheetah, and The Secret World of Alex Mack. But he's probably most well known for his decades of work on Disney's theme park film shoots, using Circle Vision film photography process. And that's including American Journeys, Wonders of China, Portraits of Canada, The Timekeeper, and Reflections of China. After years as a special effects and aerial photographer, he went on then to direct an impressive array of Emmy and Oscar award-winning actors, including Jeremy Irons, Gerard Depardieu, Rhea Perlman, and Robin Williams. And now, we proudly present a man who once dripped hot wax on 150 dancers dressed in period costumes, Mr. Jeff Blyth.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
You didn't mention that the people that I dropped the hot wax on were wearing low-cut outfits. So I was talking to Brian briefly, and I said, who are these people? I thought it might be helpful to know. And what I've come to realize through a whole day of presentations to you and your response is that you guys are really the true archivists of everything Disney. And you seem to have a great, fascinating interest in stuff. And, as a filmmaker, where you make a film and it plays for 20 years and then goes away and it's never to be seen again, it's nice to know that there are people out there who really care about this sort of stuff. And so from my heart, I say thank you very much for what you do, for all of the interest that you take in the kinds of projects that we do for Disney. So let's take a look at the first image that we've got. This is the kind of the state of the art of Circle Vision in about the 50s. And it was stick that thing up on a car and drive it. No permits, no permissions, no extras, no assistant directors, drive. Just hit the switch, turn it on, get some footage, go to someplace else, turn it on, drive, get some footage. So this was like the most uncontrolled style of filmmaking that you could have for getting, basically these are grab shots. And this particular shot, by the way, is not from a Disney film, that's from a Swiss film. They were developing a similar thing at the same time, but same principle. Disney had a better station wagon. That was the difference. It was on a hydraulic lift, so they could literally drive down the street and decide, yeah, this looks good, hit the button, and the camera would come up through the roof of the car, and then they'd grab a shot, and when they were done, they'd hit the button, and the thing would come back down, and off they'd go. So this was essentially what we called a 1+8 show, because the only thing of interest was directly in front of that car. So they would drive towards something, and then, if it was a New York scene in, for America the Beautiful, it would be driving towards the United Nations building or something, and it would be great. And so they'd have that on camera one, and they'd just capture whatever was happening on the other 8 screens. And so when they went to make the movie, America the Beautiful, and as I said, that was the state of the art when they handed the keys to me and said, you're going to make a film in China. What I found was that they had made the movie by cutting just that one screen. They would, here's the first shot, here's the second shot, and they basically made a movie the way they normally do, just one screen. And when Walt signed off on it and said, yeah, that looks great, that's fine, where are the other 8 pictures? They said, well, we have to now go and find the other 8 pictures to go with each of those. And so they basically filled in the rest of the material. And so what you find when you shoot like this, if you were to ever see America the Beautiful again, if they ever dig this up. Watch the side cameras, because camera number one was always great. It was that, we're driving towards whatever. And on the sides, what you would see would be people on the street that would be going, and so as a filmmaker, I saw this and I'm thinking, well, we have to do better than that for the next version of the film, which was going to be this Wonders of China. So, let's look at the next picture for a moment. This is the Circle Vision camera, and we had some tremendous limits that we had to work with this. Those lenses could not be changed. They couldn't be focused. You had 400-foot loads of film in each of the 9 cameras, so when you stopped to reload film, it was 3,600 rolls, 3,600 feet of film had to be changed. There was a very funky, what you can see it on the left there, looks like a periscope. That was the viewfinder. That was the only way you would line up a shot basically using that little viewfinder and then replace it with the camera that's missing. So what you took as an image with this was what I called the lighthouse view. It was this band that went around. And people are always asking, well, where do you stand when you've got to make one of these shots? Well, it's obviously underneath the camera. You'd put the camera up high enough that you could put, a couple of people on the crew. But it was this lighthouse beam of light that's all you were going to get. And so that was very, very limiting. And so we had to basically build a new way of making a film. And at the same time, we were doing it in China. Let's look at our third picture. By the way, the Chinese are known for copying everything. That last picture you saw of the camera, that was the Chinese version of the Circle Vision camera. Because every time we turned around, they were measuring it, they were photographing it, and we knew they were going to make their own camera. So you were looking at it just a moment ago. This was the Disney rig that we brought over to China, and the one that we were going to try to make this film. I had a meeting with Marty Sklar and Randy Bright, and basically they gave me a book, and it was a book of pretty pictures of China, and they said, go make a movie, come back, we need it October 1st, 1982. That was it. That was the direction. There were no other requirements. So it was just, we needed to negotiate with the Chinese, create some kind of trust with them. And frankly, trust was hard to come by at the beginning, very, very much so. But we're going to take a look at some behind the scenes now, and you'll get a sense of what the whole process was like. So let's run the first video clip, please. I apologize for the quality of these. A lot of this stuff is behind-the-scenes footage that's been duped, and it's very hard to get it from Disney. Our opening stuff that we shot was in Mongolia with Li Po. This was my idea of how to have at least one Chinese character who didn't feel like a spokesperson for the government. So I dragged a guy literally out of history and made him the one that was going to talk to us. As you can tell, this is China of 1980, 1982. Very primitive, very difficult to film. A scene like this required 22 Chinese undercover policemen just to be able to get a drive shot like this. Crowds were awful everywhere we went. And so basically what we would do is we would go into a location and strip it of people. Whether it was the Great Wall or the Potala Palace, whatever, we would strip it of people and bring in extras. This is the very first pan shot. You notice the camera's panning. We had never done that before. There's another thing that we had never done. I wanted to do a zoom. Well, you can't do it with the camera that they made the first film with, but we did a zoom by virtue of having a separate camera that shot at the same exact time as the Circle Vision camera, and then we replaced camera 1 so we could pop the zoom footage in. We went everywhere in China. You end up using camels to be in the show and also to help you get your equipment where you need it. This is Huangshan, which is 16,740 steps up. And I went up, they have a cable car there now, but to get our camera up there, we figured we were going to need 2 4-man crews to be able to just schlep our equipment up. This is in Guilin, where just the curious factor of an American crew being out there in the middle filming, we created kind of a town that was there for a week. You see the platforms that we used. This was the only way you could film Circle Vision, was to have a platform and then take off with aerodynamic housing around the magazines. Interesting, the pilot, the Chinese pilot, I was trying to explain to him what we were going to do, and he said, "Oh yeah, I've done this before," and it was like, "No, you haven't." And he said, "Oh yeah, I've done this before." And I said, "Where?" He said, "Russia." And we tracked down how it was that he was actually working on a Russian version of a Circle Vision film several years before. So he was not incorrect. Li Po, this was a character, Shiquan was the actor who played the part. This is now 20 years later. We were back in China again to update the film. Same basic camera system, but we'd added a lot of technical improvements and innovations. One of the limitations that we always had was the length of track that you could use. If you used too much track, it would get out and in the shot at either end of a dolly like that. One of the big problems we had when we came back to film was that we needed a new Li Po. The other one was retired, and I said, "Whatever you do, I need a guy who speaks English." This guy didn't speak a word of English. And so when you see him out here and he comes out and you see how he turns and faces the wall, it was like, yeah, I got to have this guy face the wall because his English was so bad. And this area of Shanghai, when we came back to film, the area is called Pudong. It's like one of the most modernistic areas on the planet right now. When we filmed in 1982, it was an empty field. There was nothing there. This is Suzhou, the canals. We had filmed there back in 1981, and then came back again in 2002 to also film there. This was getting the camera up to the roof of a building in Hong Kong. And again, that lighthouse effect, where it's only what you see within this range. If you're at the top of the buildings, you're looking out over them and you don't see them. If you shoot from the bottom of the buildings, you're only seeing the bottom of the buildings. And so trying to find that position, trying to find a location in Hong Kong that was at exactly the right level where we could capture the view that we wanted was very, very tough. And then so we must have scouted 20 different buildings at different parts of Hong Kong. And when we finally found what we wanted, it was schlep all the camera equipment up there. So after we did Wonders of China, we were trying very hard to improve the technology. We added up an actual pan head. The one that you saw in Tibet of the horse cart going by, I had literally just loosened up the bolts on the camera and grabbed the camera and rotated it. And you might wonder, well, why would you do that? You don't really need to do that. It's 360 degrees. You're going to see if it goes by, you're going to see it anyway. Well, what happens is when you're shooting film is there's a certain amount of blur, motion blur, that both the subject that's moving, or if the camera's moving, there's a kind of a blur that happens. And so if something is going to move, say, across 4 screens, it's going to blur at a certain rate. But if you pan with it and it really only moves across 2 screens, it looks much better. But the issue is, well, how do you work that in as a pan in the middle of something like this? And this is part of the discovery process of trying to expand the circle vision filmmaking process. And what I realized was that when I would describe that shot, the one you just saw, I would describe that to people back at the studio and say, well, that pan shot. And they go, what are you talking about? There's no pan shot. I go, yeah, that shot where the horse cart goes by, it's a pan. And they went, no, it's not a pan. And then they just denied it. And I'd have to show it to them and go, look, it's moving. And they went, it's a pan shot. And it was like, well, why didn't you see this? Why didn't you recognize it? And it's because the horse cart was the focus of attention. And this is kind of a key to how you work in circle vision, is that you don't just simply say, I'm going to stick a camera in the middle of something and it's going to be interesting in all directions. And you sort of let the audience wander off to go look at whatever. It's like, you don't really do that. The whole idea is to control that, where they're looking, when they're looking, and how you draw them back. And so we were adding quite a bit of new technology to the cameras. And what we're going to look at right now is from a film that was made for Expo 86. And this was not for one of the theme parks, but it was made by Disney. A little history on it real quickly. In Expo 67 in Montreal, Disney did a film for the phone company, a circle vision movie. Very primitive, from 1967. It was a lot of aerials. It was really very simple, and it was just a lot of pretty pictures, and it was fine for 1967. And so 1986, the phone company came to Disney. This is the phone company in Canada, and said, how do we do a new one? And so they said, yeah, okay, here's Jeff. He was born in Canada, knock yourself out. So I wrote a story, and what I was most interested in, and what you'll see in the clips coming up, is I wanted to be able to tell more stories, not just one guy who's a poet who talks to you and convinces you that he's not saying something that the government planned for him to say, that those were really words that I wrote, not the Chinese government. And so I wanted a story that was going to be much more human, on a human level. And the circle vision system, the setup, just really isn't built for that. So we needed to be able to focus the lenses. We needed to be able to bring a lot of the motion picture production techniques to a circle vision film. And the result was a film called Portraits of Canada, which was done, as I said, for Expo 86. We can run the second clip. It was 12 stories, 12 people from different walks of life. This, you can see me lining up a shot here. And a tremendous amount of effort goes into the directing, trying to figure it out exactly so that you're the most efficient filming, because again, every time you stop and have to reload, you would lose an hour of time just reloading 9 cameras. So the idea was that there was these Quebec lovers, the father's angry, where's the daughter? She's going to show up late. Again, I apologize for the quality of this stuff. It's in terrible shape. But notice the bedroom. And you see the bed over there. It's not really a bed. Everything you see in this sequence was just placed within that range. And so it's like the head of a bed or a picture that's been brought down so it's in the shot. Everything was kind of staged to camera. So we, among other things, we filmed a boat launch in Newfoundland. We had gone to scout this one location, and the day that we were there, they were launching all these boats. There were hundreds of boats that were all going out into the water, and it was like, well, what's this? And they said, yeah, we do this once a year. And it was like, okay, well, we'll be back next year to film it. And we also filmed kind of a celebration. The guy that's in here, Émile Benoit, he's a famous French-Canadian musician, and he actually wrote a song for me. It's called the Jeff Blyth Reel. You can find it online. One of the sequences was with a bush plane. We did some shots on the water, but the key thing I wanted to show you here was the air-to-air, because if you're just flying through a scenery, scenic, it doesn't matter. You don't really need to be able to see anything other than you're flying through the scenery. But if you're filming a specific object flying like this, you've got to be able to have video taps that will show you, oh yeah, the camera is now aimed at the plane or not. Because in circle vision, you've got the mullions, and you're always trying to line shots up so that you don't have a mullion right through the middle of something very important. This is the editing rig, which, unlike that first film, you're editing 9 pictures simultaneously. And this is on the stage at Disney Studios, where we would mix for 6 weeks. We'd do 6 weeks of pre-mixes before we could put together the soundtrack for one of these things, because the sound had to, for America the Beautiful, they had one sound that came out of all speakers. Here, you want the sound to travel with every single movement, and to do that just took these weeks of preparation. So we built this big igloo up in the Arctic. They'd never built one that big before, and the problem with that was they'd never built one that big before, and it fell down. And we were trying to build a sequence. There's crushed. We were trying to build a sequence of the thing going up, and then we were going to end up with this lovely little drum dance in the thing. But we were in an area where the sun was shining for 24 hours a day, and the town said, we just have to start over. And we were getting on a plane the next morning, and so they rebuilt their igloo for us, and it was a massive undertaking. The whole town, the entire community came out for that, and that was a real eye opener that they were able to come together as a community, and they did it for Disney, and it was wonderful. We left some. We wanted each of these locations. We wanted to leave something behind as a kind of. We didn't just blow in, grab some shots, and go. And like the one in Newfoundland, we donated some firefighting equipment to the community. In the case of the Arctic community, we knew that the town that we were filming in, Igloolik, was well known for dog team racing and igloo building. That was one of the reasons we were there. I mean, you go to the town of Igloolik. And but they would do these kind of Inuit Olympics every year. And so we said, okay, well, we want to sponsor an award. So we had the art department at the studio make up these beautiful certificates it was great. They were all the Disney characters, but also everything was done in Inuktitut. And it was, best dog team, best igloo building, whatever. And most of their prizes were like $50 or something. And so we were giving $100 prizes for each of these different things. And we left that for 5 years. We left that with them. But that was kind of how you did things for Disney, in those days. So anyway, we were moving on, and as you could tell from that show, adding a real complexity to storytelling. And hand in hand with that was adding new innovations. And so not only were we finally getting some video that we could actually see what was happening and we could record it, we were also, we changed out all the lenses. In the old days, the lenses, here's how you focused a lens. The lens had to be released from the housing, lifted out, and you would put in a very thin copper shim of a certain thickness, and you drop that in and put the lens back in, and that would shift the focus. Because in the old days, they didn't care about, when you're driving down the street with a car on the roof of a station wagon, who worries about focus? It's all got to be in focus. I mean, in those days, you used to think, well, we're just going to shoot between 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock. Why? Because that was the safest time to shoot, because the sun wouldn't get into the cameras, the shadow wouldn't come, the camera shadow wouldn't show up, and so. But it was also the ugliest time of the day to shoot stuff. But that was how they did those in those days. Anyway, so we were fighting all of those kinds of things, and one of the things we wanted was we needed lenses we could focus, because in the past, even on Portraits of Canada, what we would do is we'd say, well, we're doing the scene in the bedroom, and it's like, this is 8 feet of focus here and 10 feet here and whatever. And so we would literally build shims into each of those lenses, and that was how we created the focus. Still very, very primitive. What we came to do for later films, as you'll see with Timekeeper, is we now had lenses that we could actually focus like a real movie camera with remote control. We could, you could change the focus during the middle of a shot. This doesn't sound like a big deal because, your phone does it without you even thinking about it, right? But this was a huge deal for Circle Vision to be able to have this kind of flexibility. We had been using a dolly that we got in China for years and years. We just called it the China dolly, and it worked. It was great, and we used it on many different productions. But we finally got a better system, a better dolly, all of these things, all of these innovations. And what we were trying to do was to get to the point where we could tell a really complex story. And the last thing we were doing was just grabbing footage. We were taking, by the time we got to the show for Euro Disneyland, which was called From Time to Time, or as the show is known in Florida, Timekeeper, by that time, we were spending about a week per shot on location. That's not all the preparation. That means we would show up in Italy to do Da Vinci's workshop, and it was a week of very intensive preparation, rehearsal, shooting. And part of the problem with this system is it's film. And film is subject to dust and dirt and scratches. And we have 9 times as many chances to get a scratch on our film at any given scene that we're filming. And of course, you're trying to do longer scenes, dialogue scenes. The longer it runs, the more chance there's going to be something screwed up. So just a moment, if I could explain what you'd have to go through with film. In film, you'd have 9 rolls of film on loaded in the camera. That film all had to be the exact same emulsion from Kodak, meaning you didn't just buy some, couple of different random rolls of film and stick them together. You got from Kodak footage or raw footage that was all from the same batch of emulsion. Why? Because there are slight variations from batch to batch. Same thing that when we would shoot it and develop it, we would have to go into the laboratory, make special arrangements, and have all of our film go through simultaneously so that it was all developed the same way. Why? We're trying to match screen to screen to screen. So you add this in with things like Do we have any scratches? Did we lose any footage? It becomes very, very complicated. And especially when you're doing scenes with hundreds of extras, costumed extras, some of whom got wax stripped on them. You're trying to do all of this stuff, and you're just trying to get through it. So we're going to see some scenes from the Timekeeper show. So let's go ahead and roll that third clip. So we had hundreds of extras. In this particular case, these were reenactors that had come from all over the United Kingdom to take part in our battle. The hard part was, of course, trying to hide the camera and the dolly tracks. So that took a couple of days, and part of the reason why it takes so long is that we would shoot for a day, send the film out for development. It might be okay, but it might not, so we'd shoot for a second day. This is Da Vinci's workshop. Very, very complicated stuff.
Oh, great souvenir!
So this Waldo arm you're going to see later. It's a full-size arm that matches the little arms that the model 9i has. When we did Mozart, you can only use kids for so long, so we cast two of them, and we would just use them in alternate scenes, so we wouldn't know which one was going to get in the final scene. Those were the candles. There were hundreds and hundreds of candles, so many candles that when we were filming this, we had 14 firefighters, pompiers, hidden in that scene because they were in costume. It was massive. And of course, 9i seeing herself required an early version of 9i from, it wasn't ready for the theater back in the States, but they gave us an early version so that we could use 9i there. We filmed the Paris Exposition, of course, which was the biggest thing. This opening scene was 4.5 pages long. You couldn't do that with the original cameras. The cameras wouldn't last that long. So we had to build 1,000-foot magazines, which would mean even longer turnaround times when we were, having to do a retake. This is Michel Piccoli, and when he gets grabbed up by 9i and brought back to our present time, you'll see the rig that we used to allow him to actually, you see, he's standing on that ring at the bottom. I'm above the camera in a kind of a cage. There you go. There you see me. And it's all controlled by a crane, a construction crane that we put up and put a false facade around it so you don't see it. And then in the course of the story, he finds himself on the nose of a TGV. And so we did this in a very safe manner for him. But for the helicopter shot, that really is a stunt guy on the nose of the TGV. I mean, they built a little kind of a saddle for him in there, and he did have a seatbelt, but he's still going through the French countryside. For this particular sequence with a race, we needed 9i to be able to chase Jules Verne. We built a car, a camera car. You'll see it here in a second. That the guy has to lie flat to drive it. He could go 100 miles an hour. And that was how 9i could keep up with Jules Verne, supposedly. And then same thing here for a bobsled. If you put the camera on a bobsled, you wouldn't see it. It doesn't fit within the view. So we had to build a very long, extended bobsled. Here's our underwater rig, so that we did a sequence in the Bahamas at 65 feet. That was painful. I nearly died filming this sequence. Yeah, this was. He loved it. Michel Piccoli loved everything that he got to do, and especially this sequence coming up, because we filmed at the Mont Saint Michel, and that really is Michel Piccoli hanging out of the helicopter. That's him. And he said he did it for his grandkids. So here's this Waldo rig which is a remotely operated arm, and the idea was that the arm is Nine Eye accepting a rose
You weren't so bad
from
yourself, Jules.
Jules Verne. But that rig, that very complicated rig, now has to get out of the way because the camera's going to move and fly away, and you'll see it all sort of start to come apart. Jeremy Irons has his little bit of dialogue, and meanwhile it's all being disconnected and disassembled so that up it goes with me riding up at the top of that, all being controlled by the crane up above. And that was really tough getting the crane to work because I was used to delivering bags of cement, you know. This CG shot was the very first time we had a full 360-degree shot that was a complete circle vision environment. I had used computer graphics in circle vision as early as 1985 for the film for Expo 86. And in those days, if you needed to use a computer for, you know, I mean, keep in mind, you know, the Mac Classic is 1984. If you needed to generate computer graphics in 1985, which we did, you went to a supercomputer, a Cray supercomputer, and it took, you know, months of rendering time to do. And we were only doing like 4 screens of the Earth. So it was quite complex. But by the time we got to that shot you just saw of Paris 300 years in the future, it was still quite complicated. This show was a 30 frames per second show as opposed to a 24 frames per second show like most of the others. And that just means there's more frames times 9 that you have to generate, and they were creating Paris of the future. And so it took a year to do that one shot of flying through the Eiffel Tower. And it cost over $1 million. And it was, I remember the early meetings we had with Rhythm and Hughes, the company that did that visual effects shot. And first meeting, and we're sitting there, and we were describing all the technical elements of what it's got to do, and so on. And some guy, you know, some bean counter from Rhythm and Hughes says, "We needed to start rendering this last week, you know, to make their deadline." So they really pulled out the stops. There's a mistake in that shot, and I left it in. If you ever see the film again, Nine Eye is chasing the car in the future and going after them, and that car goes under the Eiffel Tower. And if you know the film at all, Nine Eye misses and actually runs in goes through the superstructure, and there's a kind of a metal clang as she goes through. And the way that had happened was, when you do really elaborate computer effects like this, you work from the most simple, primitive models to be able to just sort of work out the mechanics. This is how long the shot's going to be. It's going to start here. It's going to fly this way. It's going to go like that. And so the company had this very simplified version of the Eiffel Tower. And it was like, yeah, that was close enough for what we needed to do. Got the job in the works. We're working on it. And at various stages, they'd say, okay, well, we've got a higher resolution. Come and look at this. And we about halfway through the production, we're looking at it. And it was like, oh, because we'd used a really low-res version of the Eiffel Tower, when we were figuring out that path for the camera, we kind of missed. And it was like, oops, it runs into the Eiffel Tower. And it was like, let's leave that. Let's leave that in the thing. And it was like, really? And it was like, yeah. So we finished as I said, that shot took a year. And if you look at it and listen, you'll hear that clang as she runs into some metal, as she kind of misses as she's going through the Eiffel Tower. So anyway, this was this film, Timekeeper, was kind of represented about as complicated a show as you could do in Circle Vision. I've done 7 different Circle Vision productions, and without question, the most difficult shot I ever did was Mozart. And you might not appreciate why, but that was a really, really complicated shot. Among other things, we were dollying much farther than you can on a dolly track. You remember I'd said that earlier, that if you use a dolly track that's too long, it starts to get into the shot. Either at the beginning or the end, you're going to see the dolly track. So we were typically staying within 8 to 10 feet for a typical dolly shot. But we needed a longer one for this. And we were filming in a real chateau, Chantilly, for those of you who know France. And so we said, well, we're going to have to roll on the floor, move the camera on a wheeled dolly on the floor. Well, that place is what? How old is that? 300-400 years old, and it's a beautiful parquet floor that goes like this. And so you try and dolly, and it's just like that. So you can't do that. You couldn't dolly on it. So what we ended up doing, one of the reasons it took so long and it was so complicated, we built a new floor just for the area where the camera would be, and then feathered it out to blend in with the real floor. So at the beginning and the end of the shot, you're seeing the floor that we created that allowed the camera to move. But we had multiple moves. The camera went in, it rotated, the focuses were changing, and all of those kinds of things that you're doing, somebody has to be doing that, and whoever that is has to be crawling on their hands and knees underneath, doing this, while watching to make sure everything works. And, oh, by the way, we need to do this over and back thing to be able to see Nine Eye. And Nine Eye doesn't see herself in the mirror. You can't, if we had a real mirror in that shot, you'd see the crew, you'd see the camera. And that's not what we're supposed to see. We're supposed to see Nine Eye as we go by. And so I had thought for the longest time there's no way we could do this. And then I was at a presentation with Michael Eisner, and he said, I'm really looking forward to seeing that shot of Nine Eye in the mirror. And it was like, okay, yeah, we're gonna do that, Michael, because that's all you ever do. I mean, you've heard that from everybody that has been up here today. You never say no. You just say, yeah, we'll find a way to do that. And so what we did was we got this model of Nine Eye. As I said, it was an early version of it, and we created a false hallway with another false hallway behind it, and instead of a mirror, it's a window. And so you've got the camera going by in the one hallway, and you've got the dolly with another dolly with the model that has to move with it, like this. Except you've got 2 different sets of grips. These are the guys who have to haul that camera. And again, as I was saying, you've got all these other things going on with focus changes and panning the camera and all of the rest of it. And oh, by the way, you need to match up with some guys who are in a dark room and can't see anything. They're in the dark in the false hallway. So we built a gap at the bottom, and we had a flashlight on the front of our dolly that would shine right at the gap on the floor. Couldn't be seen by the camera, but the idea was that the grips that were inside there with their dolly, they could see our light when it would start to move, and they would just match with it. And that was how we got the over and back movement, so that it looks like Nine Eye sees herself. That was a nightmare. Because in addition, we had music playing in the one room, And those two boys that played Mozart at the age of 8, I think he was at the court of Louis XIV, 1743. I mean, we got into the history of it. They actually played the harpsichord. They could play the music that Mozart would have played, but we were doing it to playback, meaning somewhere there was a tape recorder that had the music on it, and it was, you're getting ready to film, and it's like roll playback, and that playback would go, and then the kid would match the movements. But then you had a second thing. The scene goes down the hall, and here are all these dancers with hundreds and hundreds of candles in the chandeliers, dripping wax on everybody, and they're dancing a minuet to a different piece of music with a different group that's a little string quartet in the corner. So they're working on a different playback, but all of that has to happen simultaneously. So this was a little bit like juggling chainsaws for me as a director, and it was not easy. So as I said, the toughest one that I've ever done, but probably only other Circle Vision filmmakers would appreciate how difficult that was. Okay, I'm going to end with my last little clip, and it's a bunch of other scenes from Circle Vision movies that I worked on, from a variety of locations, and it's just to give you a sense of how widespread, both from locations and complexity, we were doing things. So if we could run that fourth clip, please. You can turn up the sound a little bit. So one of the things about doing stuff with Circle Vision is you don't fake very much. If you're in the in a cage with a great white, it's a real great white. We actually staged a forest fire. We filmed in the Shuttle simulator down in Houston. We did a whole sequence with the Canadian Arm, filmed on a stage. Red Square, as you may remember from Timekeeper. This was a huge deal to film in the square with using the Army to help us. National Ballet of Canada. You can see him cranking the pan head. We filmed on the field at Dodger Stadium. It was between two games, back when they used to have doubleheaders. British Columbia, just really remote areas. That was the China Dolly. Filmed during flight operations off the coast here in Florida. Alaska, these are the hazards you're dealing with. We did a sequence for the Eternal Sea for Tokyo Disneyland that was British Royal Navy. The rig that you saw standing behind me there was designed to keep the camera steady in 15-foot seas. We couldn't find a helicopter in Tahiti, so we brought a B-25 from British Columbia. Yeah, and all Disney shows end with fireworks, don't they? So, there you go. That's, thank you.
Jeff, thank you very much. I think there is one more thing we have to do.
Sure.
If you could stand here, I need to take a 360-degree photo with you.
This is the fastest 360 film ever. All right. We're not going to get a lot of light, but we just have to do this. See, he'd be changing his focus right now.
Yep.
I have more than 30 degrees, too.
Do you want me to run around and get in the shot on the other side, too?